So good afternoon. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn. And my name is Cynthia Runge. I'm a family law attorney in Boston. And with me today is Irene Tomkinson, an MSW with a practice in New Hampshire. And I'm very excited to have her speak today. So I wanted to tell you some things that you've probably heard before if you've been on, if you've been locked down with the rest of us in the pandemic and doing lots of webinars. So obviously this video is being recorded. And if for any reason that you want to write a question, there is the Q&A box, and you're welcome to put in a question. We'll try to address that towards the end of the webinar. If you want to keep anonymity, you can, rename yourself if you want to do that. And I think those are the main points I wanted to address, except now I'd like to introduce Irene to you. So Irene is here because she wants you to reclaim your ta-da. And I'm going to let her talk about that. Her passion is to have every living human being realize the perfection of their own worth by dispelling the negative beliefs we've all internalized from outside sources. These beliefs push us around in our lives without our permission. Irene is an international empowerment coach who has helped thousands reclaim the self-esteem that was theirs at birth. A specialist in inner child healing and addiction recovery, Irene is a teacher and a communicator. She takes complicated psychological constructs and puts them into language that is easily understood. Her mission is let your little light shine. Irene holds a bachelor's degree in early childhood education and a master's in clinical social work. She is the author of 2 fantastic books and has been in private practice for over 35 years. A career highlight was being invited to work with abused women in South Africa. She lives in New Hampshire with her husband. So I'm very excited to welcome Irene for our first Lunch and Learn. Irene.
Hi.
Welcome. So let's just jump right in.
Sure. Sounds great, honey. Sounds great.
Can you talk about your experience working with people going through divorce?
Yes. And also right before divorce. Lots of times, when you're doing couples, they're coming with the idea that maybe this is it. It's time. It's time to let it go. That's usually one. Usually one comes in for that and starts talking about it. That's not usually 2. They come in later, maybe when they're making a last stab or a last ditch effort to make something work. All right. The bottom line is when I work with people who are going through divorce, everybody gets really, really hung up on, and understandably, because it's the survival level of how are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to create 2 households? What are we going to do with the kids? Who's going to get the family china? How do we deal with, relatives that belong to you, don't belong to me? They were part of my world, but now they're not a part of my world. Okay. That's a little bit more emotional. I probably shouldn't have gone right there. But the bottom line is, it's like they feel that if I get all these points figured out, if I get all these facts figured out, then we're going to be okay. And that is just the barest beginning. That's just the barest beginning. Because, I think we said in the promo material that if you are buying a new car, that's a change. You have to learn the new dashboard, the new info system, all the stuff, that makes everything work. But you don't have to change. You don't have to change at all. You can stay the same. You might be a little frustrated or excited or whatever, but you basically stay the same person. When you're in transition, you have to change. It's a change that's caused you to have to change. You are no longer a Mrs. You're no longer a part of a couple. You're no longer a part of a pair. Your friendships have to change. We don't want them to. We pretend they're not going to, but they absolutely do. There's just no question about it. How you live with your kids, how you celebrate holidays. even beyond like how you pay the bills, where do you live, you have to become a very, very different person. The person that you've been can no longer exist because the whole situation has changed.
Let me step back a moment. So you talked about, you went right into it of what we're here to talk about, change versus transition. So how do people deal with change, and how do people deal with transition?
Well, often, I guess most people don't deal with it well because they get hung up on, he owes me money, he's not going to get the house, she's not going to take my 401k. They get into this kind of stuff. All right. They don't get into, what am I giving up about myself? What am I losing? If you think about Maslow's hierarchies, you know what I'm talking about, like, you go from surviving all the way up to self-actualizing. So what you guys deal with as attorneys, I'm imagining that there are more attorneys listening. What you deal with is you deal with the survival stuff. How are we going to pay the bills? Where am I going to live? Who's going to get the kids? What is that? How are we going to work that out? And everybody gets really hung up on that. Okay, understandable, because that's the survival level. Just like we're having a learning lunch. If fire starts coming in my doorway, I'm not going to stay and play with you guys. I'm leaving. We go right back down to survival. And that's where people are. They're in that level. Now, if the divorce goes on for a while, and most of them, well, what you tell me, what's the time frame for most divorces?
That really varies, I mean, particularly where the courts are so backed up right now, unless somebody has an uncontested divorce, and depending on what county they're in, it's lucky if people get done in a year. If it's contested, it's usually much longer. I'm just wondering, you did a fantastic PowerPoint, and I'm wondering if we could pull that up and kind of look at some of the points that you made.
Sure.
Okay.
When you think about the person coming into your office, right? The emotional stuff is just saturating everything that's going on, because they're coming in they're either coming in very, very angry or very, very fearful. The bottom, I have one slide up there that tells you about anger. Okay, we're going to go a little out of order here. Go to the slide that shows about anger.
This one.
All right. So when anybody comes in really, really angry, for any of us, when we experience anger, it's always connected to either fear or sadness and hurt, understandably. And if we don't do both of these feelings, all right, in the process, we don't finish them. So the person who's angry is not willing to look at fear or sadness and hurt. That would take them into vulnerability, and they're terrified of that. That could be subconscious, all right? They don't make a decision. I'm not going to do my fear or my hurt. I'm just pissed, all right? But you need to understand, as a facilitator in this process for them, you need to understand that they're completely filled with fear and sadness and hurt. The person who comes in filled with fear and isn't owning their anger, they have a problem too. I'm going to use a big generalization. Often it's men who do the anger because they've been given permission to do anger, but they don't do the fear or the sadness and hurt. Often it's women who do the fear and the sadness and hurt, but haven't been given permission to do the anger. I mean, think about it this way. An angry woman is a
bitch.
An angry man is a we don't have that immediate word. We don't have that immediate word for an angry man. Strong, an idiot, whatever. Okay. A fearful man is a
nerd, wimp,
or wimp. A fearful woman is a
nut.
Well, I mean, it's just as we just don't have those automatic associations. We give a woman a lot more permission to be sad, hurt, and fearful. We don't give that to a man. We give a man permission to be angry, but we don't give him permission to be fearful, or he doesn't give it to himself, is what I'm saying. So if I could give you guys, I guess I'm thinking I'm talking to attorneys. this is hard for me not being able to see and meet the people that we're talking to, all right? You have to pay attention to the other feelings that are underneath this. I'm not asking you to do therapy on people, but I'm asking you to hold for them that there's more feelings going on than just the anger or just the fear, because everybody gets locked into, I'm going to get what's mine. You're not going to take this away from me, because we don't want to change. Human beings do not want to change. We will do anything to stay in familiar. We have familiar completely cemented in with safe. So,
Well, so if somebody's going through a divorce, and let's talk about sort of that process. I think if we go back a slide, can you talk a little bit about the stages that people go through?
Yeah, they have to go through what they're saying goodbye to.
What do you mean when you say that?
Like I'm going through a divorce, okay? I have to know that I'm saying goodbye to a future I thought I was going to have. When I got married, and get married with the idea that we were going to split this. I mean, the way we measure successful marriage in this country, in our culture, is till death do us part. So if we didn't make it till somebody died, then we failed. So there's a sense of failure. We don't have a way of measuring it. I don't think it's the healthiest thing in the world. I think we can measure it by how much did I learn from this? How much did I grow from this process, you know? But anyway, for most of us, I went through a divorce once a long time ago, and I completely believed that I was just a big loser, you know, that like, how could that possibly have happened? I did all the things you were supposed to do. I was way, way too young to make the decision to get married, you know, but anyway, so you have to say goodbye to all that you thought was, like our rituals and who we have Christmas with, or who we have Hanukkah with, or how we go on vacation. That was all a part of a plan with somebody else.
So what's the hallway?
The hallway is, you know, that this is over. This is done. We're not going back there. And I think a lot of people in the beginning, they're doing a lot of arguing about the specifics, and they really haven't accepted this is finished. This is done. That life that we had is over. It's very, very hard for people to look at. It's like standing in the hallway of, we're not that anymore, but who are we? Who am I going to be? How am I going to create this new world for myself? And then the hello to new you is when you begin to look at, who am I? You know, what do I want to be? Who do I want to be now? For a lot of people that I've worked with, they, you know, and it'd be like maybe over the course of the year as they're going through it. Like for one person that I've been working with for quite a while, initially, she was terrified to say she wanted a divorce. He was a rather abusive guy, emotionally abusive. She was terrified to find the courage to say goodbye to him. Okay, she did. They got a divorce. But she's found her own voice. She's found her own power. She's learned that she can support herself and her kids. You know, that there's been huge growth for her. She didn't realize that initially. Initially, she just was terrified of making the big change, but knew that she had to. It just wasn't working anymore.
Irene, there's one of the slides that you have. Hang on just a second. What, other than, like, it sort of reminds me of those Spyro things I had when we were little kids, but
Or the slinky.
The slinky thing. So how is this relevant to the whole concept of the old you, the hallway, and the new you?
Because what happens is we want, anytime we change or anytime we're in transition, first of all, we don't use the word transition. We use the word change. So we think we're to learn the new dashboard, get over it, we're fine. Imagine a straight line across the bottom, and we just want to check things off. We want to say, okay, did that, got that child payment. Okay, got through the courts. Okay, we sold the house. Okay. And like, it's all going to be over. It's all going to be done because we did the to-do list. What I'm trying to show you is there's no flatline to-do list. You go through one of these spirals and you feel like you're back again, feeling that, you know, like, why am I upset about this again? Why am I still angry that he found that other woman or she found another guy? Why am I still upset? Why can't I let this go? But we're in it in a very different place. emotionally, we're realizing much more how much it hurts, how disappointed and sad we are, or how now I'm angry. I couldn't get angry before. I was kind of a doormat. I just let it all wash over me. But as we move forward, you see, it's still a forward movement. It's just circular. We always want things to just be the to-do list, the to-do list, the to-do list. And it doesn't work. Life doesn't work like this. This is a process. Transition is a process. I say that as much for the people who are the facilitators, like the attorneys, as I do for the people who are going through it. That makes sense? That answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And so how does somebody know if they have a problem? Like, we all know, we all have those clients who they seem to get stuck.
That's
So
the biggest sign. That's the biggest sign. That's the biggest sign, is that we have a problem, is that we're stuck. We're not moving anywhere. We can't make any progress.
So how can we help people that are in that like how do you know you have a problem, and what are some strategies that you can use to kind of move through the process?
Well, if I were, I'm not suggesting that you guys do therapy, but I am suggesting that you do some coaching. Okay. And that if you realize that somebody who's staying up in the bitterness and the anger, but they haven't owned any of their fear or their hurt underneath, I would introduce that conversation to them at some time. Like, let's talk a little bit about hurt you are about this, because you're getting that really mixed up with this bitterness, and how people are, like holding on to a piece of hot coal waiting to throw it, but they're the ones that are getting burnt, like the one who's staying really bitter and staying stuck in that bitterness. I would encourage them and give them a little, like, look, this isn't serving you. This is hurting you, and you're not letting yourself feel the pain around this. But the only way we're going to move through this is if you recognize this is going to be different. You're not going to have the same life you had before. And maybe that's not legal for you to say that kind of stuff, but you're dealing with human beings. And it would help you to not be so hung up on, we'll get that money, or we'll get that child support, or we'll get whatever it is that we're trying to get, or we'll destroy them or whatever.
So no, I think it's a good point. So, when we're sort of in the helping professions in some ways by being family law attorneys, therapists, social workers.
I don't think you're sort of in the helping professions. I think that's the reason you got into it. I don't think you get into family law because you thought you were going to make really, really big money. I mean, there's definitely other kind of laws where you could have done different, right? So you do care. And I also think you have to recognize that it's a process for these people who are going through it. You can't just be magicians. You can't just make it all go away. And they have to feel the pain around this. They can't, the pain for somebody may be finding their voice and taking a stand for themselves. The pain for somebody else may be feeling the vulnerability around all this. That just because you get what you wanted out of the checking account doesn't mean all the pain's going to go away and it's all going to be magic.
How can we take care of ourselves as people like working in this field, helping people going through transitions?
Realizing what you can and cannot do. Like for a new therapist, like I've done clinical supervision for therapists and stuff, people working. If you're working really, really, really hard, banging your head against the wall and they're not changing, you're working too hard. That's not yours. You've got to let them be responsible for what they're responsible for. Like if somebody needs to find their voice, they need to find their voice. I'd encourage them. If somebody needs to feel the pain underneath what's going on and they're trying to stay up in the bitterness, I'd give them some feedback about that. And there's only so much I can do, right? I can't hold myself responsible because they're not willing to go through process.
Right. So I want to go back to I'm going to go back a step here. So this slide you have right here. Change, you stay the same. Transition, you have to change. You want to talk a little bit more about so you're going through a divorce, are these two interchangeable?
I don't think so. I think that changes completely. You name one thing that you only have to change, like the dashboard of a car, if you learning the dashboard of a car, if you buy a new car. When you're going through a divorce, what in your life doesn't change?
Pretty much
Everything changes.
everything changes.
Everything changes. Your income changes, your relationship with your in-laws or relatives change, your holidays change, the plans you had for the future change, everything changes, your rituals change, and it may be for the better, no question about it, but everything becomes different. And I think people just need to understand that, somebody who's like thinking about getting a divorce. All right. There's usually, in therapy, I don't know about in the law, but there's usually someone who wants it and someone who doesn't want it, someone who initiates it and someone who doesn't initiate it. And the one who initiates it very often thinks like, well, once I get this settled, everything's going to be fine. And they don't realize that, like I have a woman right now and she's separated 3 times from her husband. Now this is the 3rd time. And she's like finally going to go through with it. Okay. And she was just so sure that when she got to this place, it would be kind of like a breeze. But the same emotional stuff is going on with them. He can get really into a victim kind of spot. She can feel really responsible for that. She kind of sabotages herself and goes back there again. She cares about him. They've had a lot of years together, but they've just grown so far apart. He's so different than her. Politically, spiritually, like every way they could be different, they've grown apart. And she keeps getting lost. The hardest thing that we do in relationship is show up for the relationship without losing ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing we do.
So that's kind of a good segue to this next slide about you have to reinvent yourself. So where do they start?
They start with an inside, it's an inside job. You have to start looking at what is it I want? And for a lot of us, that's really, really difficult. We've been so used to taking care of other people or just keeping the peace or making it all work or whatever, that to say what we want can feel very selfish. It feels like we're rocking a boat. It's not okay. There's 3 questions. I wish I had done this on the slide. I didn't, but I asked people to take a look at. Okay. So one question is, and to journal, one question is, what am I relieved to let go of? Mm-hmm. If this relationship ends, even if you're not the one who didn't initiate the divorce, there's probably a tension you're glad to let go of. There's probably this fight that you're glad to let go of. Whatever's going on, the attorney bills or whatever, there's probably something in here that you're glad to let go of if you're honest with yourself. What am I relieved to let go of? And the second question you ask is, what do I keep because I've had this experience? What do I keep? Mm-hmm. An example for me would be, if my husband, death is a big transition, obviously, if your partner dies. So if something happened to my partner, I never saw him again, right? One of the things I would keep is, I love the mountains. He taught me to love the mountains. When we first got together, I would say, I don't know where I got this, but I would say, I'm an ocean girl. I'm not a mountain girl, right? And so if he was not in my life, I would still love the mountains. It's mine. And it only came because of that relationship. So what do I keep? And obviously for a lot of people, I keep these kids. And these children would not be these children had he not be the father, had she not be the mom. They are who they are, and they're a combination of the both of us. So I keep my children because of this relationship. And then the third one is, what will I miss that I cannot replace? Yeah. So my husband and I love to dance, and I love dancing with him. We've been doing it for a very, very long time. And I could dance with somebody else, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't feel the same. It would be very different. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what will I miss? And we have to be honest with ourselves with the inventory and just face it. Because if we don't face it, we're dragging around the pain without taking a look at it. And the pain's pushing us around. So the pain can push us. We don't want to. So many men, particularly, get married right away. They like jump right into another wedding, another marriage, because they haven't looked at the pain. They haven't learned what needs to be learned from this. Or they build up a wall, not just men, that's not fair to say. Or they build up a wall and they don't want to have any relationships, not going there because I'm never gonna have a failure again. That's it. I'm gonna put this bitterness wall up. I mean, we pay the big price when we just don't do the feelings. Then we don't open up to what's possible for us. We definitely lose our tada. Our tada is the juice or the joy about being alive, even when life doesn't work out the way we want it to.
Right. And so when you talked about the tada, can you talk about where that comes from?
Oh, yes. It's magic. The tada is the magic of who we are in our essence. If you have ever been around a brand new child, a brand new baby, right? There is something pretty magical about that energy. If you're not into kids and you're around a new puppy or a new kitten, there's something pretty magical about what that little essence is about. Mm-hmm. If you're not around either one of, if you don't care about either one of those two, how about blossoms? How about just new buds, new life? New life is full of juice and fabulousness, right? That's what we all came here with. We all came here with that. Wherever we believed we came from, we did that. The heartbeat, the juice, the life that's in us is pretty magical. But what happens is that we tell ourselves over time, we're not okay. We listen to others. It's not okay for me to have these feelings. It's not okay for me to use my voice. It's not okay for me to get angry. It's not okay for me to speak up for myself, for all the ways in which we put layers and layers and layers upon ourselves. It's the place in us that's full of creativity. It's the place of us that's full of play. It's where children were before they got told they were less than. Was that way too woo-woo for you?
No, I think it's important for people, because I've heard that story before, but I didn't know if it was like, I'm glad you gave the background to it. You and I talked about this before, but so what about people going through this process like at different stages of life? So like you talked about going through a divorce when you were really young. So what are some things as practitioners we should be aware of, if anything, like if you're in your 30s, your 40s, or it's a gray divorce? Any thoughts around that?
Sure. When you're young, when young people do it, I think I shouldn't say this, but as I'm looking back on it, I think it can be a little bit easier for them in the sense that they still feel that they have a life in front of them and there's more opportunity, more possibility. I don't say it's easy for anybody. Please don't misunderstand me, but you're telling me to look at my practice. When it happens to people who are a lot older, they feel like they blew their life. Like I shoulda, coulda, woulda done this sooner. Why did I hang around so long? They need a lot more self-forgiveness, and they need a lot more. Well, it's part of the whole aging process. I mean, you don't get in your 50s and 60s without thinking I coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? But also to learn that there's still so much possibility. There's so much more that's possible for them. It's not the end, but they need to grieve. They need to grieve what's over. Young people very often, I guess if there's a downside it's a downside for people to have divorce. It's a downside for people. I'm not trying to minimize it, but young people need to realize that they too quickly can go off to the next adventure and not realize, okay, let's take a look at what happened here. You both were a part of it. So in order to move on, to really move on and not drag crap with you, you might want to own what part of this you played in. I don't care who you are. Everybody played a part in this. And that you're not a victim. You don't need to, and see how it might be crushing your person. It might be crushing you inside because you've compartmentalized it so much. You're not looking at, you're just jumping on. You're going to lose some weight. You're going to you're going to start dating, you can't get on Match quick enough. If you don't learn what happened, you're going to drag it into the next relationship.
I've seen that so many times where, I mean, first of all, one thing that comes up a lot is, a new client will come in, I just want this over with. And, it's a very, very common thing to hear. And, as the attorney, we have to, yeah, we definitely want to get this over with as soon as you can. And it also takes time to unravel and to figure out what's going to be best for this family so that the person is able to make those decisions.
And that's what that spiral is about. They want a straight line. Okay, go to court. Let's get this over. I want to see what's going to be in the checkbook. I'm moving on. Okay. And I would talk to them. Not only does it take more time with the courts to do that, but it takes more time for you internally to get as much as you would like this over. And yes, I'm not going to drag my feet about it, but you need to recognize what this is costing you. And that's where that exercise about what are you glad to let go of? What do you keep because you've had this relationship? And what do you miss because it's going to be over? You need to look at, for a lot of people who necessarily didn't want this, okay, they have to look at, you had a future that just got taken away from you, a future that you had in mind. All right. So you need to grieve that. That needs to be grieved. So, and you need to realize what that cost you, and not just cost you by being angry, but the sadness about it, the hurt about it. Because if you don't flush that out, if you don't do the fear and the sadness and hurt that's under the anger, or you don't do the anger that's on top of the fear and sadness and heart, you don't finish it. The people who are bitter, who are still pissed at the ex, years and years later, and they drag that around to all the family events, and the kids no longer want to hear it. It's like, get over it, get over it. Well, we don't get over it. We need to get through it. And the way we get through it is we do the process and be real about what this is costing us.
Let's talk about kids, because, we have obviously a lot of clients have children, and they're, they're still present for like part of this process. How can we support these kids, or how can the parents support the kids through change and transition?
I think the most important way any parent can support a child is to be honest about their own feelings, to feel what they need to feel. So they're not like turning the kids against the other partner. They're not letting their bitterness and their anger splash all over the place, their victimness splash all over. When I got my master's, one of the things I did was a year working at hospice, and there was a chaplain who taught us you can cry with your patients, but you can't sob with them, meaning that you can't do all your own stuff all over them. You can have compassion and be empathic, but you don't slobber all over them. And I think so many parents do that. They either put a wall over and act like nothing's happening. We all should just ignore this. Everything's going to be fine. Mom and dad really love you. It's all okay. Well, it's not okay. It's all different. Okay. But I don't have to tear your father down. I don't have to tear your mother down because it's not working for us. And be honest. Yes, it's going to be different. I wish it wasn't going to be different, but it is going to be different. And we're going to work together to make this happen. And life is nothing but change all the time. Life is always moving to another place. Wished it could have been simpler than this, but it's not. So you can teach them the value, just owning your feelings and working on strategies together, like how we'll get through this. But it's only going to happen if I'm allowing myself that. If I'm burying my feelings, I'm not going to let anybody else have theirs.
Right.
Do you have any questions from anyone that's listening to us?
It's hard to see them in this. So let's see. I don't think we do at the moment, but okay. I still have some questions.
All right. What I just want people to know is if I'm going off on tangents or I'm getting too scattered, give me some questions and I'll come back to earth with you guys. Okay. The problem with doing these things where it's only like an hour, 45 minutes, there's so much I want to tell you. I want you to do some writing. I want you to do some journaling about what's transitioning in your life right now today. What's changing? Okay. I can use you as an example, Sen. So what's changing for you is your daughter's no longer a little girl. She's an adolescent. That's a big change, right? And it's changing daily. So I'm sure there's some things you're relieved about. You don't have to worry about her expressing what she needs. Like when she was tiny, she can speak up if something's bothering her. And then the middle part about what do you keep because of where she is right now is you start to begin to keep this kid that is becoming her own person in a very cool way, right? When you like it. When you don't like it, it's not such a cool way. But then, and then what do you miss? You miss that baby, you miss that little girl. It seemed like that happened way, way too fast, right? You still want to have her get up in your lap and give you a hug kind of thing, like she did when she was little. That's a transition. It's a natural transition. It feels, even though it feels like, of course, kids are going to grow and they're going to change and they're going to be older. And there's still a part of us that gets kind of surprised by all that. Like, how'd that happen so fast? How'd we tumble into this so quickly, right?
So it's a good point. So you brought up some of the ways that when people are having trouble with transition, we talked about that's sort of a more sort of positive, but if people are getting stuck with transition or dealing with what is going on in their life, I heard you talk about different ways they can deal with that, journaling being one of them. What are some other resources out there that we can?
Well, there's one book that I think I showed you before that just really explains transition very, very easily. Okay. It's called Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. And he talks about it at all different levels.
This one right here?
Yeah, he wrote it about 25 years ago, but it's still worth it. I mean, it's just an easy read. I think it's important for us to pay attention to what's going on. Like, we may not like it, but at least if we find out that this is normal, this is what other people are experiencing too. We don't feel like we're doing it all wrong. What's wrong with me? When we're troubled and we can't put our feelings to rest, or we can't ignore them. Somehow we've gotten into this society, or especially in our culture, that we want to run from it. We want to take some pills to stop it. We want to drink to stop it. We want to shop to stop it. We're looking for numbing rather than just moving through.
Right. The only way out is.
I'm sorry, he talks about aging. He talks about divorce. He talks about all the ways in which that, we have to change. Or loss, someone dies.
Yep. So this is definitely a book that you would recommend.
Very, very highly, very easy read. Absolutely.
And I think you mentioned something else to me, and that we've got a couple questions that we can go to. Okay. But I think you mentioned something about different professionals that people can work with.
Oh, I would really encourage, everybody can't afford it, but I would really encourage people to get a life coach for that time. A life coach is different than a therapist. A life coach will get you through changes that are going on and transitions that are happening for you. And if you're getting stuck in those different stages of transition, then you might need therapy, because I'm going to show you something. So my arm is really healthy and the sleeve doesn't go up, but can you see my arm? If I bang on my arm, it's no big deal. I can handle it. Okay. But if I had a burn or a blister in my arm and you even leaned in my direction, I'd be flipping out. You wouldn't have to touch it and it would kill. Okay. That's what happens to us emotionally. It's like we have emotional burns and blisters in us. Okay. So if you're stuck somewhere where you can't stop feeling something, I'm going to guess that you're standing somewhere in your history. It's not just what's going on in this moment in time. All right. So, for example, someone goes through a divorce, and I'll use my divorce. Okay. I was very young, but going through the divorce, I was just so um, upset with myself. I felt like such a failure because my mom had divorced a couple of times and I had sworn that I was never going to go there. I'd made this commitment. So I had this sense that I really let myself down, that I let the girls down. I had two daughters, that I had really screwed up badly, beat the crap out of myself because I held myself responsible for it. And I think I did as a kid. I held myself responsible. I was an oldest child, and I used to feel like if I could just help my mother be happier, she wouldn't make the mistakes she's making. Obviously, that wasn't possible, but that was some of the junk that I had to look at. But there's a piece of it that can very often belong to your history. And that's not life coaching. That becomes like therapy, where you just need to like work through what's coming up for you that doesn't belong to this situation, but this situation is pushing all those buttons for me. So if in any situation in your life, if the good part of your brain is saying it only deserves this handful of feelings, but I'm giving it a truckload of feelings,
Right.
you can guarantee you're standing somewhere in your history. And what you can clear up is this truckload of history so that you can deal with what's current right now. That goes on for a lot of parents when they're parenting their kids through divorce. That's part of how, when I wrote my second book, I'm Not Like My Mother, I blame myself so much for the fact that whatever difficulties I had with my girls, that it was because I got divorced. Any pain they had in their life, I blamed that I married the wrong guy, that I got divorced, that I screwed them up. I carried that around for years. And so I was always trying to make up for that. And what I talk about in the book is I wasn't paying attention to what they needed. I was so busy trying to give them what I needed when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Let me just step back because there are two questions here. So one of the questions has to do with advice for transitioning, out of a particular field that the person has worked in for a long time. Based on what I heard you say, it sounds like a life coach might be a good resource for someone who's thinking about making career changes and things of that nature.
Absolutely. And those three questions about what am I relieved to let go of? What will I keep because I've had this experience? And what will I miss? And I also have to look at the list of what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of by letting go? And really be honest with yourself. I always recommend people journal on online paper, right? And then I would journal. I'm scared of, I'm afraid to, I don't know how to, like just make that list. Like be honest with yourself. What are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that list, if you're changing careers, is a big one of fear of what. And the other thing is that, and I, so I'm 76, right? And in one of the ways that I've been transitioning, well, besides getting old and dealing with my husband and I have been together 50 years, and he's got some memory issues and stuff like now, just owning the different ways that we are physically, just owning aging. But when COVID came around, and I do a lot of live workshops and a lot of retreats, and I had a retreat center, so people would be in my home and at the retreat center. And then COVID came along, and it's like, there's none of this in-person stuff anymore. And it's how I identified myself as a retreat leader and a workshop leader. And I had to learn Zoom. I hated it, just hated it. I couldn't, it's like, I don't like doing this where I can't see people and get to talk to them. It's, and answer their specific questions. Anyway, what I didn't like, but it took me a while to be honest about it, as I didn't like the vulnerability. When you get, so being a workshop leader and a teacher over Zoom is very, very different than having people in my home and doing it the way that I'd always done it for years. So doing the whole Zoom thing, I'd get so nervous, I'd almost be in a panic attack before I'd start it, and I had a coach that was really helpful for me to teach me how to do the Zoom and work on the Zoom and all that kind of stuff. Now, the truth is, I love it because I have people that I can work with from around the world that I would have not known them, and they wouldn't have known me if I hadn't gotten all involved in the Zoom thing, right?
Yeah.
But initially, I was just like shocked at myself at how scared I was to do it, and how I just felt rambling and bumbling and felt I went from feeling really competent to feeling very incompetent, even with 30, 40 years of practice under my belt and working with people. And we have to go, and I had to go through it. I could have like given it all up, pulled the plug, but I really felt in my heart I wasn't ready to do that yet. That I wanted the reinvention, but I was afraid of the reinvention. I thought like, oh my God, you're such an old broad. You don't know how to use this technology. Oh my God, can you be any more of a loser? Then I got some encouragement from others, some younger people who really pushed me forward. And now I like it. Now I'm having fun with it. I love doing my classes. I coach people how to write their books. I love doing it. I'm really turned on. And it works well with my age because I can travel and do some other things and still do it from wherever I am.
You have another book. There's another question which I'm going to get to, but like, what about this other book that you?
Oh, I'll Take God, Hold the Religion.
Yeah. What's that about?
What's that about? I'm in recovery for 38 years from alcoholism. All right. So that's been a huge, huge change in my life. Right. So I went from I talk about it, but I went from being very, very angry at what I thought was God, because my life didn't work out the way I wanted it. I know that whole bitterness thing, right? I didn't know how to do the vulnerability stuff. I know how to stay up in the anger stuff. Right. And my life changed very, very completely through the 12 steps and some other philosophies and stuff. But what it's about is I had God and religion very, very confused in my head. I thought they were the same. And what I realized was I can believe in a spiritual world and I can believe in a spirituality, and I don't have to have religion. Like I was mad at a religion and I wasn't mad. I didn't realize I had those enameled together. So that's my story of separating them and finding my own spiritual path.
So was that a change or a transition?
Oh, it was a huge transition. It was a huge transition. And I was stuck in the anger. I was stuck in the anger about it for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty obnoxious about it too.
Well, thank you for being candid about that. These are great. All of these books, all these resources we're going to provide at the end, but they're all on Amazon. So another question here. This person works as a financial guide for women in transition. The question is, how can we be supportive of our clients, meeting them where they are emotionally while getting them to focus on the tasks that need to be accomplished?
Well, that was that whole thing about what I said about when that chaplain taught me in hospice to, it was okay for me to cry with a patient, but it wasn't okay for me to sob. Like I can hold the space for someone and allow them their feelings. And my job is to keep moving them forward. Like I hold the space for them and be encouraging and help them to recognize that there's a lot underneath here about where those feelings are coming from, and that they're strong enough to keep putting one foot in front of the other and moving forward. You can do it lovingly and genuinely, but you don't have to it's a balance, and you also can't make it happen for people if they're not willing to do the work they need to do too. Like the work I would imagine for somebody financially in transition is, I would guess, not being able, like if they came from affluence or something, they're probably less affluent after the divorce, and maybe there's some spending they have to look at, or some realism that they have to accept. So I wouldn't do it in a punishing way, but I would do it in a loving, supportive way. Like, yeah, we have to keep moving forward. And I realize you're afraid. I realize your anger. I would definitely be encouraging people to journal that stuff, and keep moving forward. And I can only take them so far. I can't take people where they're not willing to go. Some people want to stay stuck for a while.
But how do you set your own boundaries too? So, you are. Well, so as let's say for the divorce professional, whether it's an attorney or somebody working in the financial field, like how can they be empathic and also protect themselves so they don't kind of get sucked into the drama, the trauma. What are some good tips for?
You remember what your goal is. You
Mhm.
remember what your strategies are. You keep repeating the strategies to someone, like here's where we're headed. I know this isn't easy. I can't really think of an example to use, but you keep that strategy in mind where we have to go, like a friend of mine, she had a pretty lucrative divorce, and she was left a big chunk of money, right? And she at first she was terrified to spend anything, and she was impoverishing herself, which was ridiculous. And then she was acting like it was going to last forever, like it was never going to end, and she had to, and she had to look at the fact, like, you can't just keep spending this. You have so many years left, and you're going to run this all out. And she was terrified to go to work. She didn't know how to do it. She couldn't believe that she could support herself. So what the financial planner did was, well, first of all, the financial planner turned her on to me. So I worked with her about looking at, your goal is to stay solvent. Your goal is that you don't want to be, you don't want to lose your home, and you don't want to become insolvent. So you need to look at, imagine what it is while you have some time right now. We have the resources right now. You have to look at what can you do? What is possible for you? All right. And what are you afraid to do? So we had to talk about that and look at that, but we kept looking at what the goal was. Here's the goal. Here's the goal, and taking it in small pieces. Like she didn't have to become self-supporting through her own contributions in a month, but she certainly needed to do that over the next few years, because the money wasn't going to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Is that helpful? I mean, like, you need to keep it in pieces and give somebody a strategy, but you need to keep them walking forward. And if you get to a point where they're just completely not listening to you, it's like, then you have to say, I can't keep doing this with you, because my goal for you is for you to be solvent, and your behavior is not, you're not going to be solvent. Your behavior, the way you're going, is going to be very destructive for you.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how much I can do. Here's how much I can help you with, but I can't take you to places that you're not willing to go. I mean, at some point you have to, like, say, I can't do it. If you're going to, it's just like when I work with people who don't want to give up substances,
Mm-hmm.
I can't keep banging my head against the wall for you if you're not willing to come along with me. If it's more important for me than it is for you, then we have to look at that.
Right.
I don't know what your legal obligations are as attorneys, so I don't know if I have any information for you.
No, I think that's helpful. I think that the question was, sort of more like how to be helpful and supportive while also getting them to do what they need to do. And I think what I heard from you is that we just need to be empathic, but also try to keep them focused on what needs to be done. What is the goal? What is the purpose of why they're there?
And I would use the word and not the word but. I need to be empathic, and I need to keep saying, here's the goal. I need to be empathic, and here's the goal. I believe that you can do this. This is what I want for you. This is what you said you wanted. So you lovingly, safely, keep them on course, and have them look at why they're not staying on course. What's the resistance saying? Let them journal about the resistance or talk about their resistance, and keep them on course.
I also want to get to another question that we received. So it's a different type of change and transition, but do you have any advice for helping a young teenager work through change and transition as a result of the pandemic? So loss of friends, loneliness, things like that.
Oh yeah. Does the teenager know that they have loneliness, or is that person seeing the loneliness for them?
That I don't know.
Sometimes we go there, but the kid has not owned that yet. Does the kid own it, that they're lonely and hurt and are not lonely and isolated?
I don't have an answer for that. Here we go. Hang on a second. They know they are lonely.
Okay. Yeah. Then I would support them in that. Okay, definitely I would get them some kind of coaching or some kind of help that would be age appropriate for them, and then say, I'll support you as we move you to where you want to be. I'd be talking to them about what would you want it to look like if you weren't lonely, if you weren't isolated, what would you want it to look like, and start to get them to imagine how they want their lives to be, you know, and what stops them now from doing that. What keeps you from doing that? I would just, you know what, if the kid is, I think the things that that I wished I'd known this when my kids were adolescents. We get this idea that we've come as the kids' big teachers. And the bottom line, they're much more our teachers than we are their teachers. And if we could listen to them more, you know, I love being a grandmother because I'm not responsible for my granddaughter the way my daughter is. And part of the reason that she adores me is because I listen to her. So I ask her, well, how do you want to solve this, hon? What do you want? What would be good for you? What would it feel like to be good for you? What's your resistance to making some changes? What kind of changes do you wish you could make? How can I support you in the, you know, I'd let them start to develop their own strategies about it. I always wanted to jump in and fix. I spent so much time fixing, you know, and I write about that in the book, Not Like My Mother, that I was, you know, I was a control freak. I didn't know I was a control freak. I thought I was a very loving, worrying mother, you know, but I was a control freak trying to make everything okay.
So Irene, I just want to notice that the time, it's about 12:58. So I just want to start to slowly wrap things up. And I wanted to point out some information about your website, your information about your book, in addition to the transitions book that you think is an excellent resource. That's
Well,
also.
I don't think it's a 40th anniversary edition. I think it's the 25th anniversary edition. But I might be wrong about that. It's more current than that. Okay, because that just looks like, you know, it might be coming out of the dark ages.
Okay. But it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
And let's see. And then I had just my information as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know, any closing remarks, Irene?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So the
Let's
closing
go.
remark is, I hope I wasn't rambling too much and getting off tangent too much. If I could give anybody anything to walk away with, is to trust that process is something that we can get through. That's a part of being on the planet. It's a part of life. And when we own it and allow it, okay, we can get to the other side. And the other side is usually into the light. You know, every crisis brings us through stuff where we find more about ourselves. And trust the human resilience. You know, we are very resilient animals, human beings. We can get to the other side. We can get to the side that says, this is what I want. This is a life that I want to live.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's always a pleasure. You have just a great perspective on life and the human experience. And thank you so much for sharing this.
Thanks for inviting me, Cynthia. Thank you so much.
All right, folks. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the seminar. And we'll see you next time.